This is the end of Rocks Diesbeck, and despite going out with one of the biggest bangs that we have ever witnessed in the series, the reality of Xebec's end was more of a heartbreaking whimper as we now begin to wrap up this story and end our God Valley detour. But this is also one of those chapters that is packed with just an insane amount of weird Easter eggs, a lot of strange connections, some obvious stuff, but if you're purely taken with the spectacle of the fight as well as the emotion of the rocks, then I guarantee there is a lot in this chapter that you've probably missed. But you missing things in fictional pirate comics are why Australian men on the internet were created, and I want to start this video on a much lighter note as this chapter officially introduces us to a previous generation of pineapple named Polo. Polo Graham, father of Marco, who I suppose his full name is Marco Graham, maybe. And this appears to be a combination of two things. Obviously, you've got the play on Marco Polo, and we have actually seen Mr. Polo before. He was the guy in chapter 1162 that I said looked suspiciously exactly like Marco and was probably his dad. And here you can see him kicking Silverax, so he's a pretty powersome dude in his own right. And I do know that over the past few weeks, several of you haven't been a huge fan of this whole Dad Valley flashback, because it just seems like everyone is related to everyone. This is where we revealed that Blackbeard is the son of Rocks. It's also now heavily speculated that Eustace Kidd was the son of Captain John. The Capone Gang Beige is related to Don Marlon, Caribou, and Ochoku, Gansui, and Mr. Five. And before the flashback even started, we were already walking down this road with the hint of Brook being the father of Gunko. This is such a dad and or potential dad heavy arc. And also this whole flashback is contextualized around Loki telling Harudin about their dad. But I do think that this works really well with the title of this chapter, which is Echoes, as one of the major beats that Oda was trying to accomplish in general is all about how the narrator speaks at the end of the chapter about the collapse of the Rocks Pirates and having these ongoing echo effects that we are still hearing to this very day. And in fact, you could describe the vast majority of One Piece as the results of these echoes. Except that with echoes, they usually get quieter as time goes on, and then they fade into non-existence. But with these God Valley echoes, I feel like they're only getting louder as time goes on. Such as the echo of Captain John having, incidentally, been the reason why Shanks ended up aboard the Ora Jackson. Shanks is now a pretty damn big echo in his own right, but of course he also inspired Monkey D. Luffy, who is the biggest echo of them all. But also not to be underestimated is the echo of the billions and billions of world noble value that has now been directly injected into the pirate economy, which will lead to the building of the future 4 Emperors of the Sea. God Valley certainly was a lucrative event with billions of berries to be won by pirates who are going to get into some serious trouble managing all of that without today's sponsor Rocket Money. Because spending money is a skill that many of us were not taught, which is why some of us look at our bank accounts every now and then and go, that's an unfortunately low number. Well, low number, no longer. As one of the features I love most about Rocket Money is their ability to identify and cancel subscriptions that I have forgotten about with just a few taps. And to date, Rocket Money has helped customers save over $880 million dues in just cancelled subscriptions, with none of the tedious admin work of going through your bank statements and trying to figure out why you're even being charged with the practically zero information you are given. And on an individual level, Rocket Money has helped save customers up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. And Rocket Money can help you create a customized budget in seconds. It's incredibly simple and intuitive, and Rocket Money can also automate your savings. After you choose a goal, the app will automatically analyze your accounts to determine the optimal time to save so that you reach your goals faster. And as an example, I've personally been using Rocket Money for almost a year now, and one of the personal goals that I've managed to accomplish is to save enough money per month to send my dog to daycare twice a week because she gets to dress up, have fun with her friends, and ultimately save me a lot of energy at home that I can instead use to continue pumping out videos about fictional pirates. So to join me and the other 10 million members taking control of their finances today, go to rocketmoney.com/GrandLineReview to get started for free, or scan the QR code on screen. So definitely check them out, but for now it's back to you, me. Thanks, me. So this is extremely easy to miss, but also bizarrely important not to if you can help it, because old mate Gil Buster makes another appearance in this chapter. If you haven't been keeping up with him, he's something of an Easter egg character, and he served as the protagonist of Oda's one-shot manga Wanted. And here he is in chapter 1165, carrying a sack of delicious treasures, and right next to him, would you look at that, is a very familiar ghost being, heavily implying that Gil Buster was the former user of Perona's devil fruit fruit, the Horo Horo no Mi. And this might seem like a completely random choice to give to some dude in the background, but this is actually a direct reference to Wanted. In that one shot, Gil Basta killed a man named Wild Joe, who came back as a spooky ghost to haunt Gil. And Gil himself is also implied to have some connection to the spiritual world, or at least a connection greater than that of average. So Oda's just giving Gil Basta his equivalent One Piece world power, giving him a friendly ghost to tag along with him, and eventually this devil fruit will end up in the possession of Perona. And look, I don't want to keep milking Dad Valley, but we have seen a drawing of Perona as a child, and she was carrying a toy hollow. Although it would be pretty morbid if Gil Basta was her father, because his corpse ends up being one of Moria's zombie generals. Then again, Moria found Perona as a child, so imagine, right, if he killed Perona's father and then ended up raising her. Maybe, but probably not. And there's a lot of other Rocks pirates wrap up in this chapter, and that's because we really shouldn't expect too much more of them going forward, perhaps even any of them in the rest of the flashback, because this is the moment that they all fracture and fall apart. Although interestingly, Silver Axe also appears to be a God Valley survivor. That's curious because he's a character who, as far as we're aware, was invented for this flashback. And there are people who have assorted theories, mostly that he's Admiral Zephyr from Film Z. I don't know how much I buy into that at the moment. It's a maybe. But Silver Axe is also one of the few members of the Rocks Pirates who we do not know the fate of. And if it's not depicted in the manga, then this is a guaranteed SBS question in the future. We must know. But each of them are adopting the Fleetwood Mac strategy of go your own way with their own acquired treasures, even Stussy. And I imagine that she will be putting her treasure to use to fund her scientific endeavors, which would go on to lead to Mads and eventually Stussy cloning herself. Ganzui, he's also here. He's also fine. Doesn't really seem like anyone took any serious damage on God Valley, with the key exceptions of Rocks Diesbeck and the almost 100,000 citizens who were slaughtered. And that takes us to Mr. Monkey D. Dragon. And I'm somewhat surprised to see the dragon is still on God Valley. There was a lot of talk last week, some of it by me. The dragon may have been popped away by Kuma due to the juxtaposition of certain panels. But no, Old Maid Dragon, he's still here, and he is doing everything he can to accomplish just some good in this event. It's like what Emporio Ivankov said to Kuma. If they have just one survivor, then they've won. Except that from Dragon's perspective, he hasn't even managed to save a single person yet. And in this desperation, he's gone and threatened the life of his superior officer, and I love what Dragon's doing here, especially as the citizens watch. But mate, it is getting real difficult to see how Dragon gets out of this. And I don't have a whole lot of hope for anyone that he does manage to rescue either, because surely Imu Saturn would just order that the ship be destroyed, in the same way that Sakazuki did with the vessel containing the scholars during the Ohara incident. So we thought the Dragon may have been at his lowest moment in the last chapter. I don't think so. I think the pain is probably far from over for him. And overlooking everything is this shot of Imu still possessing Saint Saturn, which I think is one of the more horrifying things that Oda has ever drawn. It is beyond creepy, and it looks infinitely scarier than Imu does as a sprawling demon coming out of Saturn's body, in my opinion. Imu's now using Saturn exactly like he's possessing Gunko in the modern day as well, which means that we can probably expect that more sprawling demonic presence emerging again once we get back into things. But the main event of this chapter is of course our long-awaited Roger and Garp team up against a non-consenting Rocks Diesbeck, which I think is fair to say has turned out to be a significantly more heartbreaking encounter than many of us were prepared to dive into prior to this flashback. And it's an interesting fight because it's a bit, how do I say this? It's a bit whiplashy, by which I mean it does feel like a hard-fought, epic, legendary battle, but at the same time, it also happens ever so quickly. In the post-time skip era, One Piece has developed this reputation for having this established time ceiling with difficult battles, like Kuzan and Sakazuki fighting for 10 days, or Jack and the Mink tribe, which was 5 days, as well as Ace versus Jinbei. Those two fought non-stop for 5 days as well. Or even Luffy versus Cracker. That was an overnight affair. So part of me is feeling that this all happened a bit too quickly for an event of this magnitude, but at the same time, I completely understand. Because in World, you've got the reasoning that this problem needs to be solved as soon as possible, but also, from a more meta perspective, the reason why Oda is allowed to get away with saying stuff like Kuzan versus Sakazuki, they fought for 10 whole days, mate, it was legendary. He can only say that because Oda didn't have to draw it and spend half a year publishing just that one fight and bringing the pacing of the series to a complete halt. So instead, we do land on this somewhat generic shonen solution where we're going to combine all of the powers we have into a single attack and just hope it works. Before we get there though, this fight does have a series of amazing moments. One of my favorites being that panel where Roger and Garp take off their jackets to face off against Rocks. I love that sense of, alright, we need to actually get serious about this. Clothing optional. It reminds me a lot of Chapter 0 when Golden Lion Shiki invaded Marineford and he was met by Garp and Sengoku, who did the exact same thing. Clothes off, boys. They immediately toss their coats to the side like world-class aura farming strippers. And Garp is a big highlight for me during this clash because he is evoking some pretty serious Luffy. In particular, this punch straight into the nose of Rocks, mate, that is such a Luffy maneuver, as Luffy almost iconically generally aims for the center of the face, with one of the more outstanding examples being smacking Kaido in Gear 5th, which actually went straight through his face. And that might not seem like it's worth lingering on, it's a punch, etc., but it emphasizes the straightforward nature of the monkey family, or at least Luffy and Garp. There's very little tactical thinking, there's no going for unguarded vulnerabilities, it's very much just a contest of raw strength where Luffy and Garp both seek to overwhelm their opponents because they are that confident in their own willpower. I can't say this exact punch worked out for Garp though, as he was immediately repelled by Rocks, but it's still a moment where you can see with pure clarity that similarity between Luffy and Garp as grandson and grandfather. With another key aspect that I loved about Garp being his final attack at the end of the chapter, because he is whipping out a Gatling style technique, which is very reminiscent of Luffy, and I think this may be the first time that we have seen Garp use a multi-punch attack. Throughout every other Garp fight I can think of at the moment, he's handled himself in a very One-Punch Man sort of way, favoring single powerful strikes over the barrage approach, and I guess that makes sense because his epithet is Garp the Fist, not Garp the Fists plural, so it is very, very cool to see him going all out like this, and my only criticism is that I just want more of it. Also, I don't know if this is just my character bias, but I was expecting to see Roger evoke Ace a bit more in a fight like this, but what I actually ended up seeing is a lot of Zoro, especially in this panel where Roger is about to perform his overhead strike. It gave me flashbacks to when Zoro did his overhead attack against Kaido during the raid, and yeah, it's not exactly the same position. Zoro's positioning has one hand on the sword whilst Roger has two. I think that's because Roger is a two-handed swordsman in general though, that much is becoming very clear throughout all of this, which is likely how he taught Shanks to wield a sword as well, and subsequently why Mihawk doesn't want to fight Shanks following East Blue, because after losing an arm, Shanks doesn't have access to his two-handed style. And while Roger definitely wasn't in his prime during God Valley, he is still performing pretty ridiculous feats, because he does have the Haki trail effect on his sword. Always love seeing that, very cool. And I have to say the semantic battle in the fan base over whether or not Roger was a swordsman is getting harder and harder to make the excuse that he wasn't. The traditional wisdom has always been that Roger uses his sword as a piece of versatile flair, and that his true fighting style was going to be a hand-to-hand Haki powerhouse more akin to Luffy. But that impression is completely gone now, and we may have to start asking awkward questions like, before Mihawk, was Roger the world's greatest swordsman? And are Luffy and Zoro both looking to inherit a title that was held by the same man? It's not all action here though, because Roger and Garp do take an important but brief break to discuss current events, with Roger asking Garp whether or not he knew about this dark demonica business that we now call Emu, and Roger points out it's pretty ridiculous to associate that being with justice, to which Garp, and I guess all of us would agree, but then something very unexpected, which is that Roger appears to invite Garp to join his crew. Ha! But Garp declines because despite seeing the truth of the justice that the world government stands for, he wants to remain in order to protect the Marines, which, depending on the translation you've read, I just want to clarify that Garp said Kaihei, which refers to individual soldiers, as opposed to Kaigun, which is the Marine organization in general. So he wants to protect them in addition to the almost 200 countries that come under the umbrella of the world government and all of those millions and millions of citizens. But this is definitely going to be the start of a something with Garp. During the God Valley flashback, it has been more popular than ever to pile onto Mr. Garp for remaining with the Marines after all of this, but he clearly has his own vision of justice and reform that he's been working towards, and just as Dragon refuses to abandon the innocent lives of God Valley, Garp refuses to abandon the current world government citizens to whatever fate may occur should he not be there. Because think about this, what happens in a world where Garp isn't the hero of the Marines? Well, what happens is someone like Sakazuki comes along and probably fills that void of being viewed as a hero, and that is a much darker world. Not just one where Sakazuki is in charge like he is today, but one where Sakazuki is viewed as morally correct, where he is the hero, because we don't have a better example to look up to. But to the main man of the chapter, I'm afraid it is finally time to say goodbye to Rocks Diesbeck. However, he goes out with a hell of a showing, such as performing this ridiculously cool haki barrier that repels both Garp and Roger, and I love the way it's drawn, because it makes it look like Demon Rocks is warping the space around him. It's really trippy. And following that clash, we have another series sky splitting, which is now one of those markers that we need to have to show that a clash is on that top tier level. No sky split? What are we even doing here? And arguably Rocks, like Luffy did after achieving Gear 5th, performed the sky split mostly on his own, since Roger and Garp's attacks were negated by this, whereas the other sky splittings tend to be a show of more equal-sided power. But in many ways, I do feel like this chapter acts as a funeral for Rocks. He's still alive, technically, but he's gone. And we even have Roger delivering a tearsome eulogy, one where he claims to understand Rox's regrets, hinting that Roger may have known Rox's dreams and ambition, at the very least on a basic level, and this event could be what inspires Roger to really lock in and set sail to find the end of the New World and the poneglyphs and Laugh Tale after that. In this flashback, what we've seen is a much more playful and less mission-driven Roger, if mission-driven at all. It's mostly been a romantic comedy with Shaki, but that could all change with Roger in some way inheriting the will of Rocks and taking that to Lodestar Island, Laugh Tale, and ultimately the execution platform in Logtown. Roger could partially be doing all of that to make sure that Rox's dream, to make sure that Davy's dream is one day realized. And the panel that I hate most in this chapter is that one of Rocks crying in his demon form. I don't hate it because it's bad, I hate it because it makes me feel bad feelings. I am personally devastated for this to be how Rocks Diesbeck ended his time in this world. It's definitely not your classic Will of D death either. In fact, Rocks may go down as the only known D-Clan member to have died without a smile on his face. It's heartbreaking, and this, with the reaction of Roger, is how I can tell that we are not done with the Rocks Diesbeck story just yet. Because there is a connection between Rocks and Roger that has gone entirely unexplored. This rivalry, this tension, this respect that they've shown each other all throughout the flashback, it has to originate from somewhere. And due to the nature of how One Piece functions, once we do understand that context, potentially after seeing a Roger flashback where we delve into his even younger years, I would bet that this scene of Rocks tearing up and Roger tearing up is going to hit so much harder than it already does. Because right now, we don't know what the relationship is between Roger and Rocks. They could have been childhood friends for all we know. They're definitely not strangers at any point during this flashback, and so that context is almost certainly going to come back and hit us square in the emotional nutsack all over again. And while this chapter does seem like a conclusive full stop to God Valley, it also does end on a rather vague visual note as we pan away from Demon Rocks, we pan away from God Valley, and it does leave his exact fate still somewhat up in the air. And it certainly doesn't give away the solution to expelling Imu's influence in the modern day, so Oda's making sure to keep some mysteries going here. But you let me know what you thought of the probable conclusion of God Valley in the comments below.